In the vast cosmic dance that astrology maps out for us, Jupiter stands as a force of profound significance. Ancient astrologers called it the Great Benefic, but this title barely scratches the surface of its true essence. At its core, Jupiter represents our relationship with meaning itself, how we understand our place in the greater scheme of existence, how we connect with principles of truth and wisdom, and most fundamentally, how we uniquely relate to authentic goodness. Think of Jupiter as the part of our psyche that inherently knows there's more to life than mere survival or success. It's the force that drives us to look beyond the material world and ask deeper questions. What makes a life well lived? What does it mean to be truly fulfilled? How can we contribute something meaningful to the world? These aren't just philosophical musings, they're the very questions that shape our journey through life. In traditional astrological texts, Jupiter governs everything that expands our understanding of existence. It rules religious and philosophical thought, higher education, and moral principles. But perhaps most importantly, it represents our capacity for growth, not just external growth in terms of wealth or status, but the inner expansion of consciousness and wisdom. When we look at Jupiter in a birth chart, we're really examining how an individual connects with these deeper dimensions of life. How do they seek meaning? What do they consider truly important? What principles guide their growth? Jupiter's position and condition tell us whether a person naturally flows with these higher principles or struggles to access them. But here's where things get fascinating. Jupiter isn't just about abstract philosophical concepts. It manifests in very practical ways through our sense of purpose, our ethical framework, and our understanding of what makes life worthwhile. It shapes how we pursue knowledge, how we relate to belief systems, and most crucially, how we express our inner wisdom in the outer world. Now let's shift our lens to something that might seem entirely different on the surface: the psychological concept of narcissism. In contemporary psychology, we've moved far beyond the popular caricature of the grandiose, self-absorbed narcissist. What's emerged instead is a nuanced understanding of narcissistic traits as existing on a complex spectrum, one that touches all of us to varying degrees. Modern psychological research reveals that narcissism manifests in several distinct patterns, each representing a different way that people try to establish their sense of worth and meaning in the world. What's particularly interesting is that these patterns often develop as sophisticated coping mechanisms, ways of dealing with the fundamental human need for validation and significance. At one end of the spectrum, we find cerebral narcissism, characterized by an excessive investment in intellectual prowess and achievement. These people build their entire sense of self around their mental capabilities and accumulated knowledge. Then there's somatic narcissism, where self-worth becomes intrinsically tied to physical appearance, pleasure, and material success. The spectrum extends to include covert narcissism, marked by a complex interplay of grandiose fantasies and deep-seated feelings of inadequacy. These people often appear modest or self-effacing, but internally harbor intense feelings of being special or misunderstood. There's also communal narcissism, where individuals derive their sense of superiority from being the most caring, helpful, or spiritually advanced person in their community. Perhaps most intriguing is grandiose narcissism, which manifests as an overt expression of special status or importance. Unlike other forms, grandiose narcissists openly embrace their sense of superiority, often building elaborate visions of their role in making the world better or different. What makes these patterns particularly relevant is that they all represent different ways people try to answer those very questions that Jupiter concerns itself with. What makes me significant? How do I find meaning? What is my purpose in the greater scheme of things? The narcissistic spectrum, in essence, maps out the various ways humans attempt to resolve these fundamental existential questions when they've lost connection with their authentic source of inner knowing and worth. This is where astrology's ancient wisdom and modern psychology begin to converge in fascinating ways. The different conditions of Jupiter in a birth chart, how it interacts with other planetary energies, show remarkable parallels with these psychological patterns. They reveal how our natural connection to clarity and meaning can become distorted leading to these various compensatory behaviors that psychologists have identified along the narcissistic spectrum. As we explore these parallels, we'll uncover not just how these patterns manifest, but more importantly, how understanding them can guide us back to authentic connection with the wisdom Jupiter represents. Because ultimately, both astrology and psychology point us toward the same goal: integrating our need for significance with genuine truth and authentic self-expression. Let's start with the sun's influence on Jupiter, because it shows us something fundamental about human nature: how our deepest aspirations for meaning and purpose can become twisted into something unrecognizable. When the sun aligns harmoniously with Jupiter, it illuminates one of the most profound expressions of human potential. Imagine someone whose creative vision naturally aligns with universal truth. These folks don't just dream of making the world better, they embody the very virtues they wish to see. Their sense of purpose flows effortlessly into meaningful action, creating genuine positive change without needing to prove their worth or specialness. This natural alignment manifests as an authentic nobility of spirit. They might become inspirational leaders or visionaries, but their impact stems from genuine wisdom rather than ego. Think of those rare humans who manage to hold positions of influence while maintaining true humility. They understand that they are channels for something greater than themselves, not the source of greatness itself. When the sun agitates Jupiter, we witness the emergence of what psychologists call moral narcissism. These individuals don't just hold high ideals, they become their ideals. Their sense of goodness transforms from a natural expression into a carefully curated identity. They're not content simply doing what's right. They need to be seen as the embodiment of righteousness itself. This pattern reveals itself in subtle ways at first. You might notice someone who can't help but point out the ethical implications of every choice, who positions themselves as the moral compass in any group. They don't just recycle, they make sure everyone knows they're recycling. They don't just donate to causes, they carefully cultivate an image of being the most ethically conscious person in the room. What makes this pattern particularly fascinating is how it masquerades as spiritual or moral development. These folks often speak eloquently about values, ethics, and the need for better standards in society. But look closer, and you'll notice how their moral positioning always somehow places them at the center of the narrative. Their goodness isn't quiet, it demands an audience. The agitation shows up most clearly in their inability to let things unfold naturally. They feel compelled to control how others perceive their moral character. A simple act of kindness isn't complete until it's been properly acknowledged. Their ethical choices become performative, each good deed carefully calculated for maximum visibility. The wisdom and genuine goodness Jupiter naturally expresses becomes twisted into a kind of moral perfectionism that exhausts both themselves and everyone around them. They often become trapped in a cycle of moral comparison, constantly measuring their righteousness against others. They might speak about humility while subtly highlighting their ethical superiority. "I just can't understand how people can be so unconscious," they might say, the judgment thinly veiled as concern. Their agitation stems from a deep need to maintain their image as the good one, the morally superior being. The real danger lies in what happens next. When the sun moves from agitating to shaming Jupiter, we witness the full emergence of grandiose narcissistic patterns. Now, the person doesn't just over-identify with their vision, they become convinced that they alone can fulfill it. Their sense of purpose transforms into a sense of destiny or special mission. This is where we see the classic grandiose narcissist emerge. The self-proclaimed guru, the visionary leader who brooks no opposition, the person convinced they alone can solve humanity's problems. Their original connection to genuine wisdom becomes overshadowed by an inflated sense of their own importance. The tragic irony is that their desperate need to be seen as extraordinary actually blocks their access to the true extraordinary wisdom Jupiter offers. Under this influence, people often develop what we call a messiah complex. They're no longer content to be channels for wisdom. They need to be seen as its source. Their goodness becomes performative, their wisdom becomes dogmatic, and their vision becomes inflexible. They might gather followers, build movements, or create organizations, but their fundamental insecurity requires constant validation of their special status. What makes this pattern particularly insidious is how it can masquerade as spiritual advancement or enlightened leadership. These people often possess genuine gifts and insights. They might actually be capable of the greatness they claim, but their attachment to being seen as great prevents them from fully embodying it. Their need to be extraordinary becomes a prison that keeps them from accessing true extraordinary wisdom. The healing path for this pattern requires a profound surrender, learning to be a channel for vision and higher truth without needing to control or own it. It means developing the ability to fully express one's gifts, while maintaining awareness that these gifts flow through us rather than from us. For those caught in this pattern, the way forward often involves a painful dismantling of their grandiose self-image. They must learn to distinguish between their authentic vision and their ego's need for specialness. This doesn't mean abandoning their dreams or capabilities. Rather, it means learning to hold them more lightly, to act with purpose without becoming imprisoned by it. In essence, the Sun's relationship with Jupiter reveals how our creative vision and sense of purpose can either illuminate the path to genuine enlightenment or lead us into the shadows of grandiose self-deception. Understanding this dynamic helps us recognize when we're acting from authentic insight versus compensating for deep-seated insecurities about our worth and significance. While the Sun's influence shows us how the need for recognition can distort wisdom, Saturn's impact reveals an even deeper wound, one that makes us question whether we deserve wisdom or goodness at all. Picture Jupiter's wisdom and expansive nature trapped in a cold, dark cellar. That's what happens when Saturn's heavy influence comes into play. Saturn doesn't just restrict Jupiter's expression, it fundamentally alters how a person experiences their own potential for growth and goodness. When Saturn starves Jupiter, we witness something both fascinating and tragic, a mindset so committed to its own limitations that it transforms them into a kind of perverse virtue. These people don't just feel stuck, they've built an entire identity around their stuckness. Their suffering isn't just suffering, it's their proof of being special, their evidence that the world has uniquely wronged them. Watch how they navigate life's challenges. Every setback, every disappointment becomes another brick in the wall of their specialized victimhood. You don't understand, they'll say. My situation is different. And in their minds, it truly is. They've crafted such an intricate narrative of their unique disadvantages that any suggestion of possibility becomes almost offensive to them. The entitlement in this pattern is particularly striking. While outwardly presenting as helpless, they harbor an unshakable belief that the world owes them special consideration. They don't just want understanding, they demand it. Their struggles aren't just struggles, they're credentials that entitle them to endless accommodation from others. Yet ironically, they show remarkably little interest in anyone else's challenges or pain. Their passive aggressiveness becomes an art form. Unable to express their entitled rage directly, they weaponize their helplessness. They might sabotage well-meaning attempts to help them, then point to the failure as evidence that their situation is truly hopeless. Their revenge isn't acted out in dramatic confrontations, but in subtle refusals to engage with any solution that might challenge their narrative of special victimhood. Perhaps most striking is their umbilico del mondo perspective, seeing themselves as the center of the universe while simultaneously claiming to be its greatest victim. Every conversation somehow winds its way back to their struggles. Every piece of advice gets countered with yes, but in my case. Their world becomes increasingly small, yet paradoxically, they believe their suffering is uniquely vast and significant. The real tragedy lies in their complete blindness to how their rigid thought patterns create the very limitations they blame on the world. They're like someone sitting in a self-constructed cage, complaining about imprisonment while clutching the key. Any suggestion that they might be participating in their own stuckness gets immediately rejected. After all, recognizing their role would threaten the entire framework of their identity. And if you thought that wasn't bad enough, when Saturn shames Jupiter, something even more complex emerges. Here we enter the territory of covert narcissism, where a person's grandiose dreams and sense of special destiny collide violently with their deep-seated feelings of inadequacy. These folks often appear modest or self-effacing, But beneath this facade lies a complicated web of entitlement and victimhood. Think of someone who constantly positions themselves as the misunderstood genius or the unrecognized sage. They're convinced they have special insights or abilities, yet they're perpetually paralyzed by the fear of being exposed as frauds. This creates a rigid thought pattern where they're simultaneously superior to others in their private fantasies and eternally victimized by circumstances in their outer presentation. The shame runs deep here. It's not just about feeling unworthy. It's about feeling unworthy while believing they deserve everything. This creates an exhausting internal dialogue where every interaction becomes evidence of either their hidden specialness or the world's failure to recognize it. "Nobody understands me" becomes both a shield and a sword, protecting them from genuine vulnerability while justifying their withdrawal from meaningful engagement with life. Their relationship with success becomes particularly tortured. When others succeed, they feel personally diminished, as if someone else's achievement somehow robs them of their potential. Yet they rarely take concrete steps toward their own goals, preferring to nurture private fantasies of future recognition. "I could do that better" becomes their silent refrain, though they never actually try. The rigidity in their thinking shows up most clearly in how they handle feedback or challenges. Any suggestion for improvement is experienced as a devastating personal attack. They develop elaborate justifications for why they can't change or grow. Their circumstances are always uniquely challenging, their obstacles particularly insurmountable. This rigidity serves as a defense mechanism, protecting their fragile self-image from the risks of actual engagement with life. What makes this pattern so insidious is how it creates a self-fulfilling prophecy. Their fear of inadequacy leads to withdrawal, which prevents them from gaining the very experiences that could challenge their negative self-image. Yet simultaneously, their private sense of specialness remains intact, protected by never being tested against reality. The entitlement in this pattern is subtle but pervasive. These people often believe they deserve special consideration or understanding without having to demonstrate why. They might expect others to accommodate their anxiety, depression, or self-doubt, while being remarkably insensitive to others' struggles. Their pain is always more significant, their challenges always more worthy of attention. Perhaps most painfully, Saturn's influence creates a kind of spiritual poverty. Jupiter naturally wants to expand into joy, wisdom, and genuine contribution to life. But under Saturn's heavy hand, these folks become unable to access their own goodness. They might intellectually understand concepts like gratitude, generosity, or personal growth, but they remain emotionally closed to these experiences. The path through this pattern is particularly challenging because any suggestion of change threatens both their protective shell of victimhood and their secret grandiose fantasies. Growth requires them to risk being seen, to act despite their fears, to engage with life without guarantees of success. Most challenging of all, it requires them to acknowledge that their narrative of special victimhood has been both a prison and a comfort. Now, if Saturn shows us the paralyzing effects of shame, Mars reveals what happens when that same shame finds its voice and learns to fight back. There's something extraordinary that happens when Mars delights Jupiter. Think of it as cosmic courage meeting divine wisdom. It's like having a brave heart that knows exactly where to direct its strength. When Mars energizes Jupiter this way, we see individuals who don't just understand what's right, they have the courage to stand up for it, to take meaningful action even when it's difficult. This combination creates spiritual warriors in the truest sense. Not aggressive crusaders, but people who channel their fire into purposeful action. They face their shadows with courage, confront difficult truths without flinching, and most importantly, they're brave enough to be genuinely good in a world that often rewards the opposite. It's the difference between knowing the right thing to do and actually having the courage to do it. These folks don't just dream about making positive changes, they roll up their sleeves and get to work. When they see someone in need, they don't just feel sympathy, they take concrete steps to help. Mars gives them the energy and bravery to turn Jupiter's wisdom into real-world action. It's like having a sacred fire that fuels their ability to manifest goodness in practical ways. But watch what happens when Mars shifts from delighting to shaming Jupiter. The transformation is stark and often ugly. We move into the territory of antagonistic narcissism, where the natural courage Mars provides degrades into aggressive self-righteousness and hostile entitlement. These people don't just believe they're right, they're prepared to bulldoze anyone who suggests otherwise. Their sense of entitlement comes with a hair-trigger temper. Disagree with them, and you're not just wrong. You're an enemy who needs to be destroyed. They carry their supposed superiority like a weapon, ready to strike at the slightest provocation. Unlike other narcissistic types who might charm or manipulate, these folks seem almost proud of their capacity for confrontation and conflict. Their defensiveness takes on an almost paranoid quality. Where Mars delighting Jupiter creates genuine courage, Mars shaming Jupiter creates a kind of hostile hypervigilance. They're constantly looking for slights and insults, ready to launch into attack mode at a moment's notice. When triggered, their rage erupts with nuclear force, a devastating explosion of verbal warfare and intimidation that seems wildly disproportionate to the perceived slight. It's as if they're constantly carrying a reservoir of molten anger just beneath the surface, waiting for any excuse to unleash it. Even more disturbing is how they often seem to relish these explosive moments, wearing their rage almost like a badge of honor, a testament to their strength and unwillingness to be disrespected. This perpetual combat readiness exhausts everyone around them, eventually leaving them isolated, but convinced it's because others can't handle their truth. You'll often find these folks at the forefront of causes and movements, wielding their righteousness like a weapon. They're the activists who care more about being right than creating real change, the zealots who poison legitimate movements with their aggressive self-righteousness. What makes this pattern particularly destructive is how it hides behind noble causes. Environmental protection becomes an excuse for vicious attacks on anyone who doesn't live up to their standards. Social justice transforms into a platform for perpetual outrage. Spiritual teachings become ammunition for moral superiority. They don't serve the cause. They use it as cover for their aggression. While they claim to fight for higher principles, their real satisfaction comes from the fight itself, from finding enemies, exposing wrongdoing, and positioning themselves as righteous warriors against an evil world. Now, when Mercury starves Jupiter, we encounter one of the most fascinating distortions of wisdom, the cerebral narcissist. Here we find individuals who've replaced genuine understanding with intellectual accumulation. Their minds are like vast libraries filled with impressive knowledge, yet somehow the simple wisdom of the heart remains elusive. These aren't just intelligent people who enjoy learning. No, what we're looking at is something far more complex. These folks have built their entire identity around being the smart one, the intellectual authority, the one who always knows more. Their pursuit of knowledge isn't driven by genuine curiosity, but by an insatiable need to maintain intellectual superiority. Watch how they navigate conversations. Every discussion becomes an opportunity to display their erudition. They don't just participate in dialogue, they perform their intelligence. They might quote obscure philosophers, reference complex theories, or drop sophisticated terminology, not to illuminate the topic at hand, but to position themselves as the intellectual authority in the room. What makes this pattern particularly poignant is how it stems from Mercury's attempt to grasp Jupiter's domain through pure intellect. It's as if they're trying to understand the ocean by collecting water samples in test tubes. The vast intuitive wisdom that Jupiter represents gets reduced to bits of information, academic credentials, and intellectual achievements. They mistake the map for the territory, the menu for the meal. Their relationship with knowledge becomes almost compulsive. They might accumulate degrees, certifications, or specialized knowledge, like others collect trophies. But this accumulation never seems to satisfy. There's always another book to read, another theory to master, another intellectual mountain to climb. It's an endless quest for a kind of completion that intellectual achievement alone can never provide. In professional settings, these people often excel, at least on paper. They might become respected academics, researchers, or experts in their fields. Yet their need to be the smartest person in the room creates a subtle but persistent tension. They struggle with collaboration because admitting others might know more feels threatening to their core identity. They might dismiss practical wisdom or emotional intelligence as inferior to their cerebral achievements. The pain in this pattern lies in its fundamental loneliness. While they might impress others with their intellectual prowess, genuine connection often eludes them. They've learned to relate to ideas more comfortably than to people. Emotional vulnerability feels dangerous, so they retreat into the safety of abstract concepts and theoretical frameworks. Their vast knowledge becomes both a fortress and a prison. What's particularly striking is how this pattern distorts their relationship with learning itself. True learning requires a certain humility, an openness to not knowing. But the cerebral narcissist, under Mercury's starvation of Jupiter, can't afford this openness. They need to maintain their position as the knower, the authority, the intellectual superior. This defensive posture actually blocks them from the deeper wisdom Jupiter naturally offers. You might notice how they often use their intelligence as a weapon. They're quick to point out logical flaws in other people's arguments, ready to demonstrate why they're right and others are wrong. But this isn't the healthy debate that advances understanding. It's intellectual combat designed to maintain their position of superiority. They might pride themselves on being rational or logical, using these terms to dismiss any wisdom that can't be captured in syllogisms or scholarly papers. The tragic irony is that all this intellectual striving actually takes them further from what they're really seeking, because Jupiter's wisdom isn't found in accumulation, but in understanding, not in knowing more, but in knowing deeper. The cerebral narcissist's desperate gathering of knowledge is like trying to quench thirst by collecting photographs of water. The very thing they're seeking, genuine wisdom, meaningful insight, true understanding, remains just out of reach, precisely because they're trying to grasp it through purely intellectual means. When Venus starves Jupiter, we witness perhaps the most seductive distortion of wisdom, the transformation of genuine spirituality and goodness into a perfectly curated Instagram feed. This pattern creates individuals who believe enlightenment can be purchased, that wisdom comes from appearing spiritual, and that inner growth is measured by outer beauty. If you watch how these folks navigate the spiritual marketplace, you'll see that they don't just attend retreats, they attend the most photogenic ones. Their meditation spaces aren't just peaceful, they're worthy of a magazine spread. Every spiritual moment becomes a potential photo opportunity, every pose of serenity carefully filtered and staged. Their quest for enlightenment comes with a hefty price tag and an even heftier focus on aesthetics. The pattern reveals itself most starkly in the modern spiritual teacher archetype. Picture the guru whose enlightenment seems directly proportional to their follower count. Their wisdom doesn't flow from deep understanding, but from carefully choreographed presentations. Their retreats aren't held in humble spaces of genuine transformation, but in luxury resorts where spiritual awakening comes with ocean views and organic spa treatments. Even intimate moments become performances. Sexual tantra gets reduced to looking good in exotic poses. Sacred practices become opportunities for ethereal photo shoots. They might talk about divine union while being more concerned with how they look during lovemaking than the actual connection they're supposedly cultivating. The cosmetic surgery aspect is particularly telling. These individuals don't just want to embody wisdom, they want to look like they embody wisdom. They seek the perfect yoga body, the ageless spiritual teacher appearance, the flawless guru aesthetic. Each procedure becomes justified as self-care or honoring the temple. But watch closely. It's really about maintaining an image that can be marketed and monetized. Their social media presence, oftentimes bought subversively, is a masterclass in spiritual materialism. Every post is perfectly curated, every video professionally lit. They don't just share teachings, they sell a lifestyle. Their followers aren't seeking wisdom so much as buying into an aesthetic, the promise that they too can look this serene, this beautiful, this spiritually accomplished. The number of followers becomes a substitute for genuine spiritual authority. What makes this pattern so insidious is how it commodifies the sacred. Everything gets packaged and priced. Enlightenment workshops in 5-star hotels, designer meditation cushions, exclusive spiritual retreats where the price tag supposedly guarantees deeper wisdom. They've turned Jupiter's natural abundance into a luxury brand, where access to wisdom seems directly proportional to one's ability to afford it. Their programs and courses reveal the hollow core of this approach. Beautiful websites promise transformation, slick videos showcase serene settings, but the actual content lacks depth. It's spirituality for the spa crowd, comfortable, aesthetically pleasing, but carefully avoiding anything that might disturb the perfectly maintained surface. Real growth might be messy, but their version comes with mood lighting and a soundtrack. The relationship world becomes particularly complicated under this influence. These individuals don't just seek partners, they seek accessories to their carefully curated image. Their dating profiles are masterpieces of spiritual materialism: yoga poses at sunset, meditation shots in designer activewear, carefully staged moments of authentic vulnerability. They want relationships that look good on camera more than ones that nurture genuine growth. But watch how they handle teaching or sharing wisdom. Their workshops aren't about transmitting knowledge, they're productions. Everything is staged for maximum visual impact. The teachings themselves might be shallow, but the presentation is impeccable. They've mastered the art of looking wise without necessarily doing the deep work wisdom requires. The tragic irony is that all this external perfection actually blocks them from the very thing they're supposedly seeking. Jupiter's wisdom isn't found in perfect lighting or flawless skin. The genuine transmission of spiritual understanding rarely comes with a premium price tag or requires a professional photographer. Yet they're so invested in the appearance of wisdom that they miss its genuine expression. Perhaps most painfully, they've created a prison of perpetual performance. Every moment must be camera-ready, every experience potentially marketable. They can't simply be, they must always be on, always maintaining the image, always selling the dream. The spontaneous joy and natural wisdom Jupiter offers becomes impossible under the weight of this constant performance. Before we explore the pathways to healing these patterns, we need to acknowledge something crucial about narcissism that modern psychology has made clear. We're dealing with a spectrum, and where someone falls on this spectrum makes all the difference in terms of potential transformation. When we look at narcissistic traits, whether it's Mercury's need to prove intellectual superiority, Venus's obsession with spiritual appearances, Saturn's rigid victimhood, the Sun's moral grandstanding, or Mars's aggressive self-righteousness, we're often dealing with patterns that haven't yet hardened into permanence. These people still maintain a connection, however tenuous, to their inner light. Their Jupiter, while stressed or strained by various planetary influences, isn't completely cut off from its source of wisdom. However, we must be honest about something more serious. Clinical narcissistic personality disorder represents a fundamentally different situation. In these cases, the disconnect from authentic selfhood and wisdom is so profound that modern psychological research indicates treatment is largely ineffective. Clinical narcissists don't read descriptions of narcissistic patterns and recognize themselves. They read them and see everyone else as the problem. They don't question their behavior or feel uncomfortable about their impact on others. The very capacity for this kind of self-reflection has been lost. Modern psychology has found that at this level, the prognosis for change is incredibly poor. The inner structure required for transformation is simply no longer there. For those with milder traits, however, the very fact that you can recognize these patterns in yourself, that you can feel uncomfortable with them, that you can wish for something different, this is all evidence that change is possible. The journey isn't easy, but the capacity for transformation remains alive as long as some connection to authentic selfhood exists. For those whose narcissistic traits exist on the milder end of the spectrum, the horoscope offers us a map for healing. The delighting planets, Sun, Mars, and Moon, along with a proud Jupiter, show us what genuine wisdom and authentic selfhood look like when they're flowing naturally. Some people are fortunate enough to have these positive aspects in their birth chart, giving them natural access to these healing energies. Others can learn to cultivate these qualities through conscious inner work, using the examples of those who embody these energies naturally. This is where astrology offers something uniquely valuable. It shows us that these healing patterns exist as cosmic archetypes that we can tune into and learn from. The Sun's capacity for authentic vision, Mars's ability to act with genuine courage, the Moon's gift for emotional intelligence, and Jupiter's natural pride in its goodness, these aren't just theoretical concepts, but living energies we can align ourselves with. In my years of working with these patterns, I've discovered something remarkable. Transformation becomes possible when we understand both the cosmic and psychological dimensions of our challenges. This understanding has shaped my approach as a counselor, where I create a unique space that honors both your astrological blueprint and your lived experience. When someone comes to work with me, we begin by exploring how these patterns developed as survival strategies, ways of coping with a world that felt too challenging to face authentically. This compassionate understanding creates the foundation for change. I look for specific planetary combinations in your chart that can serve as bridges to healing. If you're struggling with Mercury's intellectual defenses but have a strong moon delighting Jupiter, we can use your natural emotional wisdom to soften those rigid thought patterns. If Venus's spiritual materialism is an issue, but Mars delights Jupiter in your chart, we can channel your authentic courage into genuine spiritual growth. The key is identifying where wisdom still flows naturally in your life. Everyone has doorways to their genuine self, even if some have become obscured. Our work together involves rediscovering these doorways and learning to trust what lies beyond them. This isn't about forcing premature vulnerability or shaming you out of defensive patterns. Instead, we work with the energy that's already there, gradually redirecting it toward more authentic expression. Before we begin this journey together, I want to be completely honest about what this work requires. While I can illuminate the path and walk beside you, offering both astrological insight and psychological understanding, the most essential ingredient is your own readiness to look within. This isn't always comfortable. In fact, it rarely is. Real transformation requires a willingness to question long-held patterns, to sit with uncomfortable truths, to challenge the stories we've told ourselves about who we are and why we do what we do. Think of it like holding up a mirror. I can help position the mirror and shed light on what it reveals, but you must be willing to look. Sometimes what we see might challenge our self-image or confront us with patterns we've worked hard to avoid seeing. This kind of honest self-reflection isn't about self-judgment or criticism. It's about creating space for genuine understanding and change. I've witnessed over and over again how this willingness to look honestly at oneself becomes the foundation for all meaningful transformation. Those who benefit most from our work together aren't necessarily the ones who start with the most insight or the least challenges. They're the ones who maintain a genuine openness to discovering themselves anew, even when that discovery feels uncomfortable or challenges their existing narrative. This doesn't mean you need to have everything figured out before we begin. You don't need to know exactly what needs to change or how to change it. What you do need is the courage to ask questions about yourself and the willingness to consider new, oftentimes uncomfortable answers. Sometimes this means acknowledging that patterns we thought were protecting us might actually be limiting us, or recognizing that stories we've told ourselves about who we are might need updating. If you feel some resistance hearing this, that's completely normal. Resistance is always part of an authentic journey. What matters isn't the absence of resistance, but your willingness to work with it, to get curious about it, rather than let it become a barrier to growth. True transformation isn't about forcing change or fighting against ourselves. It's about creating space for new possibilities through honest self-reflection and genuine openness to growth. As you sit with what we've explored together, these patterns of disconnection from our authentic wisdom, these ways we've learned to cope with life's challenges, remember that Jupiter's light never truly dims. Even in our most defended moments, even when we're furthest from our truth, that sacred connection to wisdom remains alive within us, waiting to be rediscovered. The journey back to ourselves isn't about becoming someone new. It's about remembering who we've always been beneath the strategies and defenses we've accumulated. It's about rekindling our relationship with that inner knowing that Jupiter represents, that quiet voice of wisdom that's been speaking to us all along, even when we couldn't hear it. Whether you recognize yourself in some of these patterns, or you're simply seeking to deepen your connection with your own inner wisdom, know that every step toward authenticity matters. Every moment of honest self-reflection, every choice to remain curious rather than defended, every willingness to see ourselves more clearly. These are all sacred acts of healing. In the ancient wisdom of astrology and the modern understanding of psychology, we find mirrors reflecting this timeless truth. Our capacity for transformation lies not in forcing ourselves to be different, but in creating the conditions where authentic wisdom can flow freely once again. This is the gift Jupiter offers us, not just knowledge, not just growth, but a return to the profound wisdom that has always been our birthright. If you're feeling called to explore your own patterns more deeply, I invite you to reach out. You'll find details about my counseling services in the description below. And if these insights have touched something in you, please consider sharing this video with others on their own journey of self-discovery. Subscribe to continue this exploration together as we uncover more connections between ancient wisdom and modern understanding. Thank you so much for watching. This is Ayla, signing off.